Welcome back to Third Phase of Moon. My name's Blake Cousins. The world's famous alien abduction case, the Betty and Barney Hill story. Denise Stoner, along with Kathleen Martin, who happens to be Betty Hill's niece, two alien abduction experts speak with us right here on Revolution Radio Live. And then all of a sudden, it goes dead. Kathleen Martin and Denise Stoner wonders what happens on the radio show. Strange noises come through. The host, Dr. J. Andy Elias, and I were cut off from speaking on the radio show. Was there something that they didn't want you to hear? Now listen for yourself, the strange and eerie noises that came through as Third Phase of Moon was knocked off the air, leaving Kathleen Martin and Denise Stoner wondering what went wrong. Now, the Revolution Radio Show, Third Phase of Moon.
We are live, Third Phase of Moon Radio. We have a special show for you today. We have Kathleen Martin, who's also going to be joined by Denise Stoner, her co-author, in Hour 2. For all of you who don't know, Kathleen Martin is an abduction specialist. She's been researching this for years. And on top of that, if that wasn't already enough, she actually happens to be Betty Hill's niece. So we're going to hear some amazing stuff from her. But real quick, I just want to give the shout out there to the Cousins brothers, because they're working so hard to get their information out there, and I'm truly honored to be on their team. And actually, we have Blake Cousins on the line, who's going to tell everybody what's coming soon to Third Phase of the Moon. Blake, how you doing today?
Doing good, Dr. John Andy Elias. This is going to be an amazing show and some incredible insight coming in from the niece of Betty Hill and their famous abduction case. But I wanted to give our viewers and listeners right now an update. What's been happening just the past few days right here at Third Phase of Moon. We're looking for correspondents, UFO documentarians themselves, looking for stories and people that want to share their experience with Third Phase of Moon. And we had a person that reached out, Eric McCarthy from Seattle, Washington. He's a documentarian, and he did an amazing special report in regards to bizarre UFOs caught on video right there in Seattle. And I suggest everybody go take a look at that huge flying saucer documentary special report 2013. And again, more footage continuously comes in. Vicki Lee, a new correspondent to Third Phase of Moon, introduced amazing footage from, again, the UFO hunter from Myrtle Beach, Joe Kiernan, sharing incredible footage, along with what looks to be an exploding UFO, or basically started out as looking like a star, then it exploded into pieces, and it looks like they have their own sense of awareness, and it looks like there's some intelligent, design going on behind it. Our Honda UFO sent us some amazing video. Again, UFO breaks apart, shocking UFO reports from around the world. Take a look at it, Third Phase of Moon. And last and not least, just yesterday we received another video. We're not exactly sure where it is. The person who sent it to us wants to remain anonymous. But Lisa, she goes by the name Lisa, and that's all we have. And she was from inside an airplane, and she captured an amazing UFO off the wingtip. There's a little jet stream coming off of it, but what it is, we have no idea. It's spectacularly bright. It looks to morph into an angelic form. Is this some kind of new military aircraft? We have no idea. But again, Third Phase of Moon is the top UFO channel because we're putting it out there as fast as we get it to the world. And we're going to be doing an update with Billy Meyer from Germany. And in regards to his controversial story, footage, and everything else, we're going to be asking his special correspondent right here, representing him here in the United States, Michael Horn. So that's what we got going right here at Third Phase of Moon. Dr. J. Andy Elias, back to you.
I'd like to also add that Third Phase of Moon is celebrating 90,000 subscribers. We couldn't be doing it without the public's help. And as a gift, we just finished filming a great documentary focusing on alien abduction this past weekend. It should be out this coming month. It's going to be called The Alien Abduction Chronicles, and it's going to be free right there, Third Phase of the Moon on YouTube. And aside from that, you got to check out the channel if you've captured anything amazing. Like Blake said, make sure you find us via Skype or Facebook, Third Phase of the Moon. And without any further ado, let's jump into Kathleen Martin. Kathleen, are you with us today?
Yes, I am. Hello.
How are you this evening?
I am fine. It's a beautiful evening here in Florida.
I wish I could say the same in Los Angeles. It's starting to get hot. But, let me tell the viewers and you one thing. I personally love alien abduction cases, and this is why. These people come in contact with other worldly beings, and they're the only source we can get of how these beings interact, what they do on the ships, how the ships look like from the inside, and all other glimpses that we get into otherworldly life from them. And that's what fascinates me about this so much. And that's why I always love to speak to an abduction specialist such as yourself. Now, for everybody listening, Kathleen Martin has written several books. One of the famous ones, if you heard it's Captured. It chronicles the Betty and Barney Hill abduction from 1961, and Stan Friedman wrote a couple chapters in it, but Miss Martin wrote the majority of the book. That was a great book. She also wrote an essay in UFOs and Aliens. Several authors actually did. But the most recent book, which is my truly favorite, is the Alien Abduction Files, which chronicles a few different cases in detail. There are some great drawings in there of what some of these beings look like. Personally, I'm looking at one right now of the insectoid being. I believe this was Denise's case, which we'll talk about in hour 2. But let's start from the beginning. You are Betty Hill's niece, and obviously I would assume that some of the fascination from this came from that. Did she start telling you about this abduction early on? I mean, were you basically raised hearing about this case?
She absolutely did. Her abduction occurred on September 19, 1961, in the early morning hours. It was after midnight, and she was probably released from capture at about 2 a.m. And drove on home with my Uncle Barney to Portsmouth, New Hampshire on the seacoast. They went to bed and rested, and when they woke up, Betty called my mother. And it was funny. Barney said to her, "Betty, don't tell anyone about what happened last night. No good can come of it." And it was typical of Betty to show him that he wasn't going to boss her around. She walked to the phone, picked it up, called my mother, and I was seated in the same room. It was the afternoon. I was home from school. And so I heard my mother's side of the conversation with Betty. When my mother hung the phone up, then she filled me in on the fact that Betty had told her that she and Barney had a close encounter with a flying saucer the previous night when they were returning home from their vacation trip. So I was in on this from the very beginning. Within 2 days of that phone call, my family drove up to Betty's and Barney's house. It was about 20 miles away from my childhood home. And we heard the story from each of them, heard about the close encounter. Barney sat on the couch and told my father about the non-human entities he'd observed through the windows in that craft as he looked up at it through binoculars. My father told me that he clearly remembers that. And my father is still alive. He's 90 years old now. But he told me that a few years ago when I was investigating the case on my own. And we saw the spots on the trunk of the car, these shiny spots that caused a compass needle to spin, indicating that there was a strong magnetic field in that area of the car. Been found on other people's cars too after an abduction experience. We know that today. I remember Betty handing her watch and Barney's watch to us and passing it around and say, "See if you can make these watches run," because they were running the night before, but when they arrived home, they were not running. They rewound them thinking they just had run down. They were wind-up watches. The watches never ran again, and it was probably because of the magnetic field from that craft. So there you have it. Betty's dress was torn. I didn't see the torn dress until years later. She had already folded it and put it in her closet, knowing that it had to be repaired. There was a 2-inch tear in the stitching along the top side of the zipper, a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric. The lining was torn from the hemline to waist, and the hem was torn down on one side. It had been in fine shape when she'd put it on the morning of September 19. On the morning of September 20th, it was torn. There was no prosaic explanation for how that tearing had occurred. The tops of Barney's best dress shoes were deeply scraped. He had to buy new shoes and wear those for yard work after that. So there was a lot of evidence that something had happened. They knew at that time they had arrived home later than anticipated. It didn't really sink in until a couple of months later that they were missing at least 2 to 3 hours of time.
Kathleen Martin, welcome to Third Phase of Moon. This is Blake Cousins. I want to get to this question. You're speaking about evidence, and one of the recent documentaries we did called The Alien Human Project was in regards to alien implants, and Dr. Roger Lear was removing them from alien abductees. Has Betty ever been scanned for body plants when she was alive?
No, Betty was never scanned. Some individuals had suggested to me that we have Betty autopsied to look for implants, but Betty's daughter objected to that idea. She did not want her mother to be autopsied, so she was not.
With a case like this, I think that would probably be the best, maneuvers to do an autopsy. She might have some smoking gun evidence of extraterrestrial implants in her. Is there any way, is the daughter still around, that maybe she could be, put into another kind of way of thinking and possibly allow that to be, to that process to happen?
No, her daughter said absolutely not. She will not permit it.
Let's go back to the Betty Hill encounter, Kathleen. 2 things I want to say. First, if you don't mind walking us through the whole encounter for all the listeners and the viewers who are going to see this on Third Phase of Moon, and also talk about if Betty Hill and Barney were upset that Dr. Simon released this information.
Well, he didn't really release it, but let me start at the beginning.
Yes.
Okay. Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire, and she had a week-long vacation. My Uncle Barney worked for the post office in Boston, and he decided to ask for a few days off so that he could surprise her with a trip to Niagara Falls and on to Montreal. He was granted that short vacation, and they left and went on their trip. They had planned to spend the night in Montreal, but they heard that a hurricane was coming up the coast, and they decided that they wanted to drive home before the hurricane hit. They had lawn furniture and that sort of thing that they wanted to lock up so that it wouldn't blow around the yard. So they drove home through the night, planning to stop if Barney grew tired, but he was well rested from the night before. They had spent an enjoyable day driving around and walking around Montreal, sightseeing, and they left late that afternoon to drive back to their home in southern New Hampshire on the seacoast. As they were driving through northern New Hampshire, and this was at about 11 o'clock at night, maybe 10:30 at night, between 10:30 and 11, let me put it that way, they passed through the town of Lancaster. And just south of Lancaster, Betty saw a new light in the sky. It was a bright, starry night. The moon was almost full. It would be full in about 4 to 5 days. And this light attracted her attention because she thought it was a falling star at first, only it sort of fell upward in the air, and then it stopped. And it started growing larger and larger as she watched it over the next half hour or so. And she asked Barney, finally, to stop. She was really curious about it. She wanted to try to identify what it was. And so they did stop at just south of Twin Mountain, New Hampshire. This was at the Mount Cleveland picnic area. Got out of the car and looked at this thing as it moved in even closer, and then moved out away from them and came back very rapidly. Got back into the car, and they drove south toward an area called Franconia Notch. This is a beautiful scenic area in New Hampshire. And the craft was at that point pacing them as they drove along, Betty looking up at the craft. They stopped again at the Old Man of the Mountain. And the reason they did that was as they entered Franconia Notch, the craft was directly ahead of them, hovering over the top of Cannon Mountain. And Cannon Mountain has an aerial tramway going up there. It's a ski area in the winter. In the summertime, you can take a ride on the tramway up to the top of the mountain. There's a lighted signal tower up there, and there's also a restaurant at the top. Betty saw the light at the top of that mountain, which was a steady burning light, turn off or blink off as the craft passed over the top of it. So they reached the Old Man of the Mountain, which was only maybe a mile or less south of there, on the other side of the mountain, and got out of the car and looked up. Now, the Old Man of the Mountain's profile is 48 feet from chin to forehead. And at that point, they could judge that the craft they were looking at was at least 1.5 to 2 times as the length of the old man's profile. As they looked up at it through binoculars, it appeared to be rotating, and it appeared to be lighted on one side because they would see this blip, blip, blip. And it looked almost cigar-shaped at that point because of the lights that they would see as it blipped along. They got back into the car. They realized that it was large, that it was silent, that it was just hovering up there next to the old man's profile. Betty continued to watch it as it moved in a stair-step pattern, as it seemed to bounce back and forth in the sky. And then it started to come in very close. And as they exited the south entrance of Franconia Notch, she was becoming excited. It was an area called Indian Head, and the Indian Head Resort is there. And today, right in front of that resort, is a historical marker that the state of New Hampshire erected on the 50th anniversary of Betty's and Barney's encounter to commemorate the event. So moving back to the story, Betty asked Barney to pull over to the side of the road again. So he's looking for a place to pull over. But before he can find a spot, the craft shifted ahead and stopped right over the top of the highway. This was Route 3 in New Hampshire. It was a major north-south route at that time. And Barney had to stop the car right in the middle of the highway, straddling the center line so that he wouldn't be directly under the craft. And then it started to descend toward Betty and Barney. When it was over the car, it was about 200 feet above the car. They looked up at it. They could see a row of windows with an intense blue light shining out from behind those windows. Barney is looking up at it through the binoculars when it shifted to an adjacent field. And he walked into that field with the binoculars and looked up at the craft. And that is when he saw the non-human entities looking back at him. And what I'm telling you now is all conscious recall, what they remembered before their hypnosis sessions with Dr. Benjamin Simon. Everyone, except for one of those figures standing at the window, then turned and walked toward a panel in unison, almost like Barney said it reminded him of the way that the military moves, that they did it all at once. and their arms went up. He could see them from the tops of their heads down to their knees. And when their arms went up, something started to drop down from the bottom of that craft. And this and the intense look on the leader's face, who was standing at the window, making eye contact with Barney, frightened him terribly. He thought that he was going to be captured like a bug in a net, he said. And he tried to pull those binoculars away from his eyes and finally succeeded and ran back to the vehicle, screaming to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. As he was getting back into the car, the craft then shifted over the top of the car. He noticed that. And he told Betty, as he went speeding down the highway, to roll down her window and to look up to see if she could see the craft overhead. She was expecting to see lights. She didn't see lights. All she saw was blackness. It was like a black void. And so she rolled up the window and she said, "I think that it's gone." But then, as soon as she did that, she and Barney started to hear a series of buzzing or beeping sounds. They were code-like. They were a sort of electronic buzzing sounding, or electrical maybe. And they seemed to be striking the trunk of the car. And when this occurred, the car began to vibrate, and a tingling sensation passed through Betty's and Barney's bodies. The next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway with very little recall of what had happened in the interim. They remembered encountering a roadblock somewhere along the way. They didn't know where or when that occurred. They remembered a bright, fiery orb silhouetted on the road. It seemed to be against a stand of trees. It appeared to be moving, but they were not moving. This was part of their conscious recall. They then, Barney at that point, attempted to make that vibrating sound. He heard a second series of beeping sounds or buzzing sounds, and Betty did too. And he was wondering, was something shifting in the car? Could he cause that to happen? He experimented. He couldn't cause it to happen. So he then just drove back to Portsmouth. He and Betty were really hungering for human contact. They wanted to make contact with somebody. It was the middle of the night. They couldn't find a restaurant that was open. They didn't encounter a police officer. They just drove alone back to their home in Portsmouth, arriving at about 5 o'clock in the morning.
Kathleen, we got a few minutes here before we go to break, but I want to talk a little bit about the hypnotic regression. You know, the story you've just shared with the listeners right now is a classic close encounter of the third kind. Now we're looking at a photo here. It looks like a drawing of a greenhouse and aliens levitating a person up into a flying saucer, very much a close encounter of the fourth kind, contact. Could you explain to us what this picture is all about? And did Betty and Barney, for the viewers, have continuous experiences with alien beings?
Okay, I think that you must be looking at the alien abduction files.
Yes.
With Jenny Henderson being taken up through a window in her house up to a craft accompanied by three beings. Now, Betty and Barney were walked onto the craft. They think that is what came out under hypnosis, and even before hypnosis, Barney did remember seeing non-humans in the road in front of him, and this was very shortly before his hypnosis sessions with Dr. Simon. They were in the road. They were walking toward Betty and Barney. And Barney, I remembered when he remembered that he was at my childhood home and we were trying to facilitate his memory. And all of a sudden, he had a major abreaction, a huge outpouring of emotion, and told us about how they walked differently than humans in kind of a rolling gait, and how they were coming toward the car. And under hypnosis, he and Betty remembered that there was a group of ETs standing in the road, and the motor of their car died, and this group divided into two, and three went to Barney's door, and three went to Betty's door, and.
We will pick this up right after, Kathleen. For all you listeners out there, stay tuned for Third Phase of Moon Radio. We'll be right back in literally 2 minutes. We are back, Third Phase of Moon Radio, live right here. We are researchers on a mission for the quest for the truth. We've been speaking to Kathleen Martin, who is an abduction specialist, author of 4 amazing books, and also happens to be Betty Hill's niece. Just before the break, we were talking about revisiting the old Betty and Barney Hill case, which actually is a little over 50 years old now. And just before we went, the commercials interrupted us. Kathleen Martin was speaking about how they went about to recall their memories and finding Dr. Simon. Can you pick that up where you left off, Kathleen? And then I got a question to ask you about Marjorie Fish.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, I was talking about the capture and how this was revealed through hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was a renowned psychiatrist in Boston, Massachusetts. Betty and Barney saw him every Saturday for about 6 months in 1964. And he saw them separately, and he induced amnesia at the end of each session so that they couldn't even remember what they had stated. He wanted to make sure that they couldn't share information, contaminate each other's information. So I was talking about their memory of being taken from the car, and they realized that these were non-human entities in the road. Barney said, "I think it's the ones I saw in the field." Betty then became terrified. She said that she'd never been so frightened in her entire life. She was crying on the hypnosis tapes as she attempted to escape from the car and run into the woods, but she was intercepted before she was able to step out of the car by 3. She and Barney were both taken down a path in the woods. As far as I know, she was walking, but Barney felt as if he was floating, and only the toes of his shoes were striking the rocks, he said, as he was moved along. And then he felt the toes of his shoes slide up an incline and bump at the top of a little elevated structure at the top of that incline as he was taken on board the craft and into an examining room. Betty fought. She didn't want to go onto the craft. They didn't have the kind of control over her at that moment that they had put on Barney, who had a gun and left it. They took it from him and left it on the car seat. I know that because he sat on it when he was returned. So she then ripped her dress as she fought not to be taken up. She got a good kick off onto one of the ETs. They then took control of her, took her into an examining room, and she and Barney were given separate examinations, very much like occurs today. There were skin samples taken, skin scrapings. They looked into the different orifices in their bodies and took samples from that, hair samples. They took samples of reproductive material from Betty and Barney. They examined their skeletal system. They were very interested in human skeletons and in their nervous system. And Betty and Barney both thought that they were attempting to determine the differences between humans and themselves. Betty had the famous needle in the navel inserted into her navel, just as women do today. And we know that today that process is to remove ova. And it caused excruciating pain. And the one that she called the leader, that I call the escort today, took away her pain. That's the one who today has a relationship with his human subjects throughout their lifetime as they're taken over and over again onto the craft. You asked if Betty and Barney were taken more than once. They both denied that they had been taken more than once, but I have Betty's files, and as I've read through them, I have come to suspect that she actually was taken more than one time. And I wrote about that briefly in Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience too, because I had an experience at her house that I believe indicated that she had been taken the night before. So I do think that Betty was taken time and time again. Barney died at age 46. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you think she pretty much kept those other alien abduction experiences kind of secret because she kind of figured, well, let's stick to this one, because if we start saying we've been abducted multiple times, that this story might not be taken as seriously as it really has, because this story still, even though the many years have gone by, still holds traction, and it's quite amazing to hear it from Betty Hill's niece herself. Go ahead.
Yes, I do suspect that that is what occurred. And we know that Charlie Hickson, for example, spoke about continuing contact with UFOs and was heavily criticized. Back then, many researchers, UFO researchers, would not believe that there were even beings on board the craft. They thought they were remotely controlled. And so if anyone claimed to have an abduction, they were under suspicion. But if you claimed to have more than one, they would say, oh, this is absolute nonsense. That's impossible. People couldn't even have more than one UFO sighting in a lifetime, they would say. So I know that that probably had an impact upon Betty.
You know, one of the most astonishing things about this case is the Marjorie Fish map. Well, Betty Hill, under regression, drew a star map that she was shown on board. And Marjorie Fish, for all you listeners out there who don't know, tried to recreate this. And what she did is she took little balls and hung them by string in her room to try to see from which angle this star map could have existed. Now, at the time, she couldn't find it because the star maps that we had couldn't match up to it. 7 years later, though, apparently we were able to see further into space and see these. And Marjorie Fish was able to do this 7 years prior to what mainstream science was able to, which confirms that what Betty Hill saw on the craft and recreated under regression existed, even though in the face of all these people who were denying it, truly happened. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why it's so important?
Yes, Marjorie went to extraordinary lengths to identify the stars on Betty's map. Because we didn't have computers then, and she couldn't just go to the library and check the book out. She had to go to the university, to the astronomy department, and sit and copy all of the distance data for all of the stars in nearby in our galaxy. And then take all that data back to her house, do the math, and using monofilament and line, construct three-dimensional models of our nearby galactic neighborhood, about 55 light years out. In all, she constructed 26 of these models, and one of them had 256 stars in its proper three-dimensional location. It's just, I'm awestruck by the intelligence of this woman and the determination and the patience to go through all of this work in order to attempt to find this identification. But it wasn't until 1972 that she completed her work when the last 3 stars were found. and they were in this new Gliese catalog that she was getting the distance data from, and there they were. All of the stars on Betty's map could be identified. She had the pattern. And the interesting thing is that all the pattern stars were sun-like, although only 5% of the 1,000 stars in the neighborhood out 54 light years are sun-like. So the odds were just incredible for this being a real map and not just a coincidence. The statistics on it being a coincidence ranged from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in a million. And Marjorie at first expected to find many perfect matches for Betty's drawing, but in the end, she could find only one. And this is where Stanton Friedman came into it, because she was attempting to find scientists to vet her work. And Stan was called in to help her to find these scientists. He talks about Marjorie and how impressed he was with her intelligence. He said that she was much better at communicating with scientists than with the general public. And Alan Hynek, David Saunders, who was on the Condon Committee, and the astronomy department at Ohio State University, vetted Marjorie's work and stated that it was accurate. Her distance data was correct. Every star was in its proper location. And the base... Oh, go ahead.
Yep. The phone lines are lighting up right here at Third Phase of Moon and Dr. Danny Lice. Who do we got on the line?
We actually have Joe Kiernan, the All-American UFO hunter who's been submitting stuff. Real quick, I just want to tell everyone the phone number in case you guys have a question for Kathleen Martin, or she's also going to be on the second hour with Denise Stoner as well. The phone number is 347-474-7228, show extension 818. Again, 347-474-7228, show extension 818. Joe Kiernan has been a submitter of Third Phase of Moon. He's also going to be featured in the Third Phase of Moon book, which is being published as we speak. He's got amazing footage, and nonetheless, he is right here on the line to ask Miss Martin a question. Joe, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Hello, Miss Martin. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you. I wanted to pose a question. It's been discussed by quite a few people that I guess my question in hand is related to Miss Betty Hill and how she was returned in reference to clothing, being that there is a popular abductee who claims the possibility of being returned in Miss Betty Hill's dress, nightgown rather. Do you think there's any correspondence to that?
No, there isn't. We did the research on this. It was intriguing at first because Betty actually was missing a red flannel nightgown one day and never did find it. But we found out later that the nightgown that the experiencer that you're talking about was a different size, a different description, and it was a different date. So it was not Betty's nightgown.
Well, thank you very much. That's very clear.
You know, we've been talking about the Betty and Barney Hill case. This has actually stood the test of time. Everything from corroboration from Dr. Simon, who basically gave his approval, saying that they truly suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome, and Marjorie Fish's star map, which confirmed Betty Hill's star map. Now let's change gears and talk about some other abductions, because you've been investigating several, Ms. Martin. I want to first ask you, one of the ones that you talk about in the alien abduction files is the Reed case. Can you tell us briefly about it? Because one of the great drawings that Mr. Reed commissioned to be drawn is about this insectoid. And I've seen one of your lectures where you talk about how they sit in such a manner where their legs kind of look like an M.
Yes, that is something that Denise Stoner noticed, I believe, and also that Tom Reed talked about. So I interviewed him. The investigation itself was done by the Mutual UFO Network, But the story began in Western Massachusetts, where Tom and his brother were young boys, and a light came into their bedroom and uh, came in again a few nights later. And Matthew discovered that Tom was then missing from his bed. He went and then he was also taken onto a craft. The Reed boys can the Reed men can tell this much better than I can. But I found it to be a really fascinating story because their mother also had an experience in the Allagash in northern Maine when she was a teenager. So this could possibly be where all of this started. And then the Reeds were taken several times throughout their lifetime. Uh, Tom and his brother Matthew, his mother, and his grandmother were taken aboard a craft when Tom was 11 years old. And they were at a horse show in Western Massachusetts that day, returning home at night. And this craft came down and picked all of them up and took them on board for physical examinations, and then they were released. And the experiences still happen from time to time today. And something that really impressed me about this case is that, first of all, Tom Reed was investigated by MUFON and passed a lie detector test with no evidence of deception. And his brother, Matthew, reported a missing time event as he was driving in Indiana. And it was at night, and he had a missing time event. He was on one road. As if only a moment had passed, he found himself on another road, and his car was stopped. It was beside the road. He had mud all over his shoes. Uh, it was very, very strange. There was missing time, and he reported it to MUFON. The STAR team went in, and they found physical evidence, which is really important. They measured a strong magnetic field around the trunk of his vehicle, and they also had a very high radiation reading on the car and the ground around the vehicle, but not on the adjacent land to that. So it makes me wonder if the car was actually picked up when it was taken. And I've always wondered if Betty and Barney's car was actually picked up too and then set down in another location. Because somehow they ended up on a different road than they had been driving on. And for Betty and Barney, there was no possible way that they could accidentally have turned onto that road. They would have to come almost to a complete stop and make a sharp left-hand turn to get onto another road by a side road.
You know, people speaking of being taken in their cars and then recall seeing their car inside the ship or maybe in some base with other hangars, in a hangar with other UFOs or disc-like shapes, and seeing their car is this isn't the first occurrence. As a matter of fact, in another book that you participated in that we mentioned earlier, UFOs and Aliens, which is a compilation of original essays from several amazing researchers, including Kathleen Martin and yourself. You mentioned, or one person in here, Jim Maroney, spoke about his abduction case where he recalls seeing the car when he was abducted inside a ship that he presumes it could have been a base. You know, I think that's just an amazing thing. Now, I also want to ask you, because we talked about these insectoids, Betty and Barney Hill drew and actually sculpted something that resembles the beings that took them. What do you know about other beings? What other races exist that are taking people?
Well, that was one of the questions that I have asked on the second stage of my first questionnaire project. This is the Marden Stoner Commonalities Among UFO Abduction Experiencers study. And we did this research project for an entire year in 2012. We started at the end of 2011. We had 50 experiencers and a 25-person control group for stage one. In stage two of that project, it was a ET technology questionnaire. And I'm still collecting completed questionnaires from individuals. I have less than 30. I need 50 in order to really compile the results. So if anybody's listening who is an experiencer, I'd certainly appreciate it if you'd go to my website at kathleen-marden.com and fill that out to help me with this research. But I can tell you what I have so far from, it's about 28 people. The majority have seen the grays, the short grays, the taller grays. I think we're all familiar with the grays. Then the next most prevalent group is the insectoids, who are often seen working in concert with the grays. Reptilian beings are also mentioned in about 40% of the cases, I believe. People see hybrid beings, a cross between what they believe is the grays and humans. People have reported a Nordic type of being, an Anunnaki type of being who is also human in appearance but very, very tall, and tall whites, tall goldens, short blues, sort of short pudgy blue beings. And some people have even reported sort of hairy, almost Yeti-type beings.
There's a few movies Hollywood has portrayed alien abduction cases, and the ones that come first to mind are like Close Encounters, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and a movie that came out at the same time E.T. came out. But it was actually a horror movie made in London, and it was called Extra. And this movie was absolutely horrifying, and it's interesting to me, this insectoid rendition of this alien encounter looked to me exactly like the one in the movie Extra. We're going to be coming to break in a couple minutes, but I want to ask you, is there, being that the Betty and Barney Hill was the first abduction case ever put out there in the public, known to basically man and the world in that sense, has Hollywood made contact with you to recreate the story? Or it's to me, it's quite interesting. There's a lot of people in Hollywood that kind of jumped on this story and put their own twist on things.
Yes, Stan and I have taken a motion picture option on Captured. So we're hoping that there will be a movie down the road sometime.
And we would be dying to see that. We hope it comes out soon because, I have not seen the one with James Earl Jones. I know that was a made-for-TV event, but that was great that they actually did that they covered the case. But now that the public, especially the younger generation, is more open to this, I would love to see a major motion picture about the Betty and Barney Hill case. Now, let me go back to something you just said a moment ago when we were talking about other races. You mentioned the people seeing the Yetis or something similar to those large hairy beasts, which, again, for all you listeners out there who don't know, the mountain Yeti is also the skunk ape, which is also the Bigfoot, or whatever you want to call it, Sasquatch. It's just been seen around the world. Do you think, Kathleen, that this Bigfoot or Yeti, Sasquatch or skunk ape is the same and it's actually an extraterrestrial?
I really have no idea. I can tell you that out of 50 respondents, only one mentioned that. So it was a very, very tiny percentage of the respondents who mentioned a Yeti-type being, or those short blues, or the tall whites, or the tall goldens. Almost everybody else had talked about the first groups that I spoke of.
Now, out of all those beings, again, we're coming to break shortly in about a minute and a half, but of all those beings, can you tell us which ones are the meanest to the abductees and which ones seem to be the most sympathetic with their pain and terror?
Well, without a doubt, the reptilians are the meanest. They're the ones who reported over and over again to have raped women on the craft. I receive very positive reports about the Greys. Only some people are very frightened by them too. But when you're talking about pain and fear, that comes with the Greys. Most people who have contact with the Nordic types are not fearful of them.
And it looks like we are coming on break. Everybody, we are listening to Kathleen Martin. She will be staying on. Denise Stoner is joining us second half of Third Phase of the Moon Radio Live. Stay tuned. We'll be right back in a couple short minutes. We are back to Third Phase of the Moon Radio Live. We are researchers on a mission, and I'm your host, Dr. J. Andy Elias, joined by the founder of Third Phase of the Moon, Blake Cousins, UFO hunter and researcher, Joe Kiernan, and our guests today are Kathleen Martin, abduction specialist, author of 4 amazing books, who also happens to be Betty Hill's niece, and we also join now, hour 2, with Denise Stoner, who has been a MUFON Assistant Director of Abduction Studies for over 2 decades. She is an asset to MUFON, and she made her writing debut, her author debut, with Kathleen Martin in the Alien Abduction Files. Now, just before we went to break, we were talking about the different races that abduct people. And Kathleen, you mentioned that the reptilians seem to be the meanest. After you finish telling you what you're saying, Denise Stoner, I want to pose that same question to you and then ask you about your experiences.
Sure. I don't care for the reptilians either, and I don't like to research or investigate those. I really don't know why. I can't tell you why, but the depth of my research is with the Greys and with the insectoids.
Now, a lot of people, not a lot, but several people, including John Lear, Jim Sparks, claim that there's some Greys that are not really full beings, that they're half robotic and half bio, and therefore they don't really contain a soul, and they're not really sympathetic or empathetic, and it's more that the taller Greys seem to be the ones in charge and to be the ones that, for lack of a better term, have a soul. Would both of you agree with that, or what's your take on that?
Well, I would have to say from my point of view that the larger Grey, I have an escort that's always been with me for as long as I can remember. And I would have to say that, yes, that escort is intelligent, that it is a true being. Whether they have a soul or not, I don't know. If I were to be made to choose, I would say yes, because they can alleviate pain. They can take away fear. They can make someone feel comfortable in their environment. And they come from me. I recognize them, and I now could pick them out of a Grey lineup. And so, yes, they are not robots. I truly believe they are not. The smaller ones, I call them soldiers, and something makes them operate outside of their own choice to maneuver.
Kathleen, what would you have to say with that?
I agree with Denise on that. I'm not certain if the smaller ones are cyborgs or if they are actually biological entities or robots, but they are the ones who do not express emotions. They are the ones who behave as assistants or guards, or as Denise said, soldiers on the craft. They seem to pretty much take orders from the taller Greys, who seem to be sentient beings, who are intelligent, who communicate, who do have some range of emotions, and seem to be sympathetic toward humans.
Denise Stoner, welcome to the show. This is Blake Cousins. I want to ask you a question. You just spoke of your escort, an alien Grey, a taller being, above stature of the common Greys, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The question is, does this being communicate with you on a basic level, or does it get quite complex, like world events, maybe what their agenda is, Do you speak with the entity and like, well, it's kind of a nice day today? How does the communication break down?
No, not at all. It seems to me that this being only speaks when absolutely necessary. The agenda is this is what we're going to do. You're going to come along with me when we reach the craft. This is what we're going to do here. It's all right. Oh, you're in pain, so my forehead is touched to alleviate the pain. If I'm overly fearful, there's something that they do to communicate. You're not going to be afraid. That pain and fear are alleviated. And it's like I'm going to follow their instructions because since I was a child, I've been all right with it, and I know I'm going to be returned. That being has not given me any information beyond that, and I'm just beginning to reach the point where perhaps I'll try and ask some more questions. I have not up to now.
I think that's, maybe speak to them as how we're just speaking right now in a general, realistic, genuine way and see what their reaction is. It sounds like you have a continuous, encounters with this being, and do you have a name for him?
I just call him my escort or my guide. That's all I have ever called him. I almost don't feel like there could be a name, although Kathleen and I are in the process of figuring that out a little bit more. I'm going to see if there's a way, because I was taken again this past February, and there's got to be some way we can look for that. We can find out if possibly there's a name for this entity, just as if the insectoid being that works with him that I call the doctor, the one who has shown more curiosity about my feelings, my reactions to what he's doing, his probing, his medical procedures. I've come very close to asking him why he's doing what he's doing, and I just haven't. Is that because he stopped me from thinking that way, stopped the process of questioning him? I don't know.
Oh, I guess we had a little feedback there. I see Joe Kiernan had a question. Mr. Kiernan, are you still there? I think we might have lost him too. That's okay. I wanted to ask you, Denise, when did your abductions begin?
Those abductions began when I was 2.5 years old, on the very night my mom was in the hospital giving birth to my sister. Although I need to make it very clear that I did not realize that's what was going on until I was older and could relate that big object in the sky and the little being that came to get me to take me to come and play. At least I thought that's what it was. Until I discussed it with Kathleen, until I discussed it with Dr. Romack, he's explained in the book, a doctor I worked with on hypnosis. And we put that all together, like you couldn't have been taken to this craft, you couldn't have seen this huge thing in the sky and fear in your grandfather's eyes unless that was an abduction process. And we worked it through, and yes, it was for years.
Joe, I know now I think you're back on. Go ahead and ask your question that you were burning to ask.
Yes, hello. Hello, Ms. Stoner. How are you this evening?
I'm fine, thank you.
I was curious, in all the studies that all the studies you've been going through, are there signals that pop out on someone that leads you to believe they might not necessarily be telling you the full story, or are there signals that are given off that you think hypnosis might be necessary, even though your claimant really might not be too sure of it?
That's a very, very long process. Neither Kathleen or myself will even consider hypnosis until we have known these people for quite some time and have gone through long discussions, a long process of questioning, and have used some of the things that we keep back, just as if in a crime scene we know certain things, and if they give off some of these hints and clues, and we can say, oh, okay, there's one, there's another hint, there's another part of the crime scene, we wouldn't call it that. So let's see if we can help this person put together the rest of their puzzle pieces, and we would perhaps offer hypnosis to complete that picture for them.
We are now joined also by Preston Dennett, MUFON researcher of 25 years, author of 17 books, including UFOs over California, UFOs over New York, UFOs over New Mexico, and also a book on UFO healings. Preston, how are you today?
I'm doing good, John. How are you? Hello, everyone.
Excellent.
Hello.
I know you had a burning question for them both. Go ahead, Preston.
Oh, yeah, I've got tons of questions. I mean, I think UFO phenomena itself is extremely important, but this abduction phenomena, I think, is really central to the whole subject and is where we're going to break this whole field wide open. So I'm wondering, Denise, you had a lot of experiences, a lifetime of experiences. What prompted you to go public, and do you regret having done so?
No, a couple of times I was on the edge of regret, and then I thought, okay, I've done everything necessary to prepare for this. I'm retired. My husband is retired. My mom is still alive. I was able to talk to her, and she's fine with it. She wants to explore this and what would happen once we came out and perhaps help others. I have 12 cousins up in Connecticut. I've talked to the majority of them, and they're all fine with it. We just don't have a problem at this point in our lives. We're all in our 60s. And so why not? Why not do it now and reach out to everybody that might be on the verge of at least just going for help, finding someone they can talk to who has a support group and exploring that arena, because otherwise they're liable to go into their 80s still not knowing and not having any of their questions answered. So it's time, and no, it doesn't bother me at all.
So you have a pretty large extended family. How did they react? Does anyone else have experiences as well?
My mom, my dad were sure that he did. My nephew, my sister, and those are the ones that I am aware of. My cousins, I am not sure, because if they do, they haven't spoken of it.
You know, like I said last hour, one of my favorite things about alien abduction cases is because we get to speak to people that actually had interaction with these otherworldly beings. I wanted to pose this to you, both of you actually, because since you've known many abductees over this last several years, decades for that matter, can you describe what the inside of the ships look like? And have any of these beings ever showed the humans what their cities look like and what they eat and basically what their home life is like?
Boy, I can tell you from my point of view, and then Kathleen can mention it. The interiors that I've been shown are seamless. They're material that appears to be metallic, but no nuts and bolts, nothing. The tables just run into the floor as very fluid-like. You can see no place where they're attached in any manner, not like you could remove them or they would sink into the floor if you pushed a button. It's all one piece. That's what I've seen. There have been some ledges, but also that is smooth. Going down hallways, again, everything appears rounded. I was taken into a room, asked if I wanted to see the core of the ship in one. Not that all the centers and the operation of ships are the same, but the one I was taken into, I had a physical reaction to. I'm still having a reaction to what occurred, and it's involving muscles and nerves. It appeared to be a biological, basically, and I felt like I had a connection with that. And it was as if to tell me, now I connect with all the other ships like me, and we know where each of us belong and how we run and where we are. And it was just traumatic. Kathleen has a video, because I had her go back a second time to refilm the reaction. I didn't know I had one the first time. I had no idea. She asked me if I was aware of it, and I said no. So we went back and she filmed it. And I've given her permission to show that video. So you can ask her now. Oh, I saw no signs of any food, of anything edible anywhere on any of the crafts. So I'll add that to the mix. And then Kathleen can comment on what she knows.
Well, what I hear over and over again is that, of course, there's a hallway that encircles the small craft, and part of it is lighted, but the back portion where the examining rooms are is generally very dimly lit. As is the examining room, oftentimes, particularly in the small craft. The rooms have rounded edges and seems to also have sort of a rounded kind of ceiling. The table in the room is sort of molded into the floor. There is often a screen on the wall that the human is shown images on in that room sometimes. Let me think. I'm aware of 4 different types of crafts. A very small one that's almost helicopter shaped or a teardrop shaped, one that is a larger rounded model, another rounded model that is even larger than that. And then I'm aware of the large model where a lot of times it's described as almost like an isosceles triangle with rounded points. And on the inside, there are wide hallways with rooms off the hallways. And a lot of times this is where classes take place, where reproductive experiments take place, where people see hybrid beings, where there are vessels containing hybrid beings being gestated in sort of like artificial wombs, that sort of thing. And a lot of people speak of just a normal lighting on those larger crafts. But I hear so often about the little tiny rooms and how dimly lit they are on the smaller craft.
You know, I want to get back to Denise. You spoke about the connection with the aliens and the other ships around, and it sounds like a network going on. And we interviewed on Third Phase of the Moon via the Alien Human Project, alien abductee Tim Cullen, and he spoke of an alien implant that was removed from him by Dr. Roger Lear, and at that moment he felt at one with this object, that it was aware of him and he was aware of it. Denise, have you ever had a body scan to see if you've been implanted? And if so, and if not, and if you have it, you might want to check. And if there is one, we have access to material scientists, surgeons to remove this thing, find out what it is. Would you be willing to do this? And like I said, have you ever been scanned for an alien implant, Denise?
I have not been scanned. However, at one point not too long ago, I had something put in at my elbow, and I went and showed Kathleen right away, and we tracked it because it started to move. It moved down my left arm, and it was about the size of a BB, and it was very hard. And over a period of 5 days, it traveled down my arm, and I was considering going in and having it scanned. I was considering having it removed, and we both felt it as it moved down my arm into my hand. When it reached there, it stayed on the back of my hand for about 2 days, and it disappeared. It just flat disappeared. I could find no exit wound. I don't believe Kathleen noticed anything either, but it was gone.
Wow. I have a question, actually. This is a question for both of you. One of the first abduction cases that I ever investigated was here in Reseda, California, involving this young woman who had gray-type ETs come into her bedroom several times and operating on her brain, she said. This was all recalled consciously. And her mother was also having experiences. And as I was interviewing the family, I found out that the father worked for the military doing highly classified projects. And this is something I keep coming across in other abduction families. And I noticed, Denise, that you actually did work in the military as well. I see that here in your book. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering what you think the connection is there. And you, Kathleen, have you run into this pattern as well?
Well, my dad worked for aerospace, and he worked first for Aerojet. in Sacramento or outside Sacramento, California, and then he went to work for Command Sciences. So didn't our friend who was looking for us that day we were missing for 3 hours up in Colorado. And my dad would go out to a test site called Jackass Flats to test whatever it was he was working with. He couldn't talk about it. And then he also passed away of a very strange illness that it's common, but they can't figure out where he came down with it because they believe it was due to some chemicals he was working with. And so all of these types of things in the family, my husband's relative also worked, we believe, at Area 51. And we have all the proof in the world that that's where he worked. He used to disappear for great lengths of time, told us all kinds of stories about that. I can't name names because we promised that we would not. Not over the air anyway. And he was an engineer. He also worked for Bechtel Corporation and was involved with a lot of different types of things there. He also worked with my dad.
So clearly this is a factor of some kind.
Well, we wonder. We don't know. And yes, I did work in a simulation laboratory at a research facility that was military.
And I have to say that many of the individuals who have contacted me have either served in the military or grew up in military families. So there seems to be a higher than what anticipated percentage of people with a military connection.
Do you think that's because they're trying to, invade our military, so to speak? And, it concerns me a little bit, honestly, that. I
have no idea. I don't know. Wow. I'd like to know.
I would too.
Ms. Stone, I wanted to ask you another question. If we could jump back a few minutes ago when you were describing the 4 separate types of crafts. In your knowledge on the crafts, when you are taken aboard the crafts and examinations or any time you're on the crafts, are these crafts somewhat close to ground, or are you taken possibly outside the atmosphere?
Boy, I would relate to something that we've discovered while we were researching and investigating. In one of the larger crafts like this, it's a very, very good possibility that Jenny and I saw each other on a craft. Jenny was escaping or attempting to escape some project, we feel. These may be research ships in a lot of different aspects because I actually recalled a balcony, and on the balcony was another individual I recognized. That person is not aware that they had been abducted. I questioned them after I was brought home during the week and asked them if they owned a certain particular outfit. I was told yes. Once I realized that happened, I couldn't say, hey, I saw you the other night on a ship. I just couldn't do it. But I am pretty sure that I saw Jenny, and Kathleen asked us both separately, individually, about our outfits. They matched. And we were on this ship, a balcony opened up. We were in some very, very cold area, like possibly the Rockies. It looked very Swiss Alps type down on the bottom. Lots of granite cliffs and trees, and I was holding an object. It was very heavy for its size. It was shaped like a box, and when we were told we were to drop these objects off the ship into the woods below, into the forest. The entities were very displeased about what we were doing. It wasn't working correctly. There were lots of lines of abductees in hallways. We were all in some sort of aspect working on these projects, and that's when I'm sure I saw Jenny as attempting to escape, not wanting to follow through with the project, and ran into one of the rooms off to the side. So there may be a lot of things going on in these larger crafts.
So you were able to actually see scenery from the balcony?
Yes.
Wow.
That craft tipped very close to the granite cliffside before that balcony opened. And when I found myself back at home, my feet were frozen. My face was red as from the wind blowing, it appeared. My cheeks were all red and had a little bit of, not frostbite, but rosy like they'd been out in the snow. My hands were cold.
Yeah.
And the bottom of my pajamas were damp.
You know, we got a couple more minutes before we go to the next break. I know this is going to be a long answer, which I'm going to pose to both of you. I want to talk about the alien agenda. Like I said, if it takes us into break, we will continue it right back up. But both of you, what do you think they're trying to do? Dr. Jacobs believes that they're making hybrids, and that each generation of these hybrid babies seems to look more and more human in ultimate goal so they can infiltrate Earth. And he believes right now they're walking amongst us. Do you agree with that? And in your opinions, what is the alien agenda? We'll start with you, Kathleen, then we'll go to you, Denise. If it goes into break, we'll pick it right back up.
Well, it's just so perplexing to me. I do have knowledge of individuals who have felt that their DNA is perhaps being tweaked. I've spoken to individuals who have had facilitated pregnancies by the Greys, that there was a human mother and a human father, but they felt that perhaps some DNA from the Grey being was spliced into the human DNA, and in a process perhaps to bring about change in human beings, to perhaps for our own survival, to perhaps remove some of those negative emotions that we have that get in our way of developing and moving along on an evolutionary scale of growing up to a point where we might someday join the cosmic kindergarten. So that's just speculation on my part. I don't know.
No, and I'd have to say one comment that I am so intrigued with, and I need to find the answer, and I don't know why. I'm obsessed and compelled to get the answer. I know that I was told on a ship that what they create and what accidents.
Denise,
yes.
We are going to have to pick this up right back after this short break. All you listeners out there, this is just a quick 2-minute break. Stay tuned. Third Phase of the Moon Live. We'll be right back. We are back. Third Phase of Moon Radio Live. We are joined. I'm your host, Dr. J. Andy Elias, joined by my co-host, Preston Dennett, also UFO researcher Joe Kiernan, founder of Third Phase of Moon, Blake Cousins, and our special guests, Kathleen Martin and Denise Stoner. Real quick before we go back to where we were talking about before, since this is the last leg, if anyone out there wants to ask anybody a question, especially our special guests, call in 347-474-7228, show extension 818. Again, 347-474-7228, show extension 818. And I just want to tell everyone, make sure you listen live every week, Thursdays, 8 to 10 Eastern Standard Time. Guests in July include Stanton Friedman, William Henry, Carrie Cassidy, and John Searle, the godfather of free energy. Just before we went to break, we were talking about alien agenda. And Denise, you were just about starting right before the commercial started. So if you don't mind picking up right where we left off, go ahead.
Sure. Yes, I was told at one point, because I believe I was used as a breeder, that whatever mistakes are made as far as breeding, we must carry ourselves and then raise on our own. So does that say that there are some sort of hybrids here? They didn't care for the results, and we are raising hybrids, and we just don't recognize that fact? And who are they? I don't know. It's been driving me crazy ever since I recall being told that.
Preston, you had a question real quick before we get to the other ones.
Yeah, this is a question actually for both of you. I love the book, by the way. It's absolutely just a wealth of information, very well written, and I highly recommend it. So my question is, a number of abductees that I've interviewed, and certainly this is turns up with other researchers, and I noticed this in your book, have received messages of future disasters and warnings of environmental problems upcoming. And I'm wondering what you think of that whole theme that keeps coming up in these UFO encounters.
Well, I wonder if the ETs focus upon this so often with humans when they're aboard the craft that perhaps this has happened in the ET's past to their own planet, and that they're very concerned about our planet, and therefore are warning us that we really need to take care of our environment before we lose it as they did theirs. And, then there are other researchers who believe that this is all a test of human emotions, and that the ETs are only interested in observing the way the humans react to an environmental disaster on a screen, because they're so interested in our emotional range. So, it's another question, but it's sort of fun to speculate about.
Well, certainly they've given predictions that have not come true. So
yeah.
That's true also. And there's also something that we are looking for, because when Kathleen used some hypnosis on me to try and find out what it is I feel I have locked up inside that I can't get out, I can't recall, something happens. I have a reaction. And then she told me that others have had the same reaction. We're trying to have others come forward and mention it without us telling them what it is, to see how many of us have the same thing occur when they try to force the memories forward.
Do you think that, are there any emotions or any feelings that would lead you or others to believe an abduction was going to be taking place that day or evening? Or are there any signs that you're given to make you pay more attention?
Yes. And I didn't realize it for a long time, but I can pretty much tell that something's going to happen. And a couple of times I feel like I've been able to avoid it. And it's a feeling in my head. That's all I can say. And it's almost like a telepathic message, or something that says, yep, it's going to happen tonight. It's going to happen today, later on this afternoon, and you're not going to be able to stop it. And you just know that, and you live with it for the amount of hours that you go through until, boom, you're gone.
So it possibly involved in that whole empathy thing, where does it feel like more of an emotion, or how does that come
it's
across?
Fear.
Or it's difficult.
A kind of a vibration,
Okay.
almost a physical vibration, and then the fear that you know it's going to happen.
And
go on, Joe.
I was just curious how you think you were able to avoid it at certain times. That is very interesting.
It was by accident, because my husband and I were traveling back from North Florida on a weekend trip. My mom and my daughter were in another car following us, and I don't know if they realized that's what was going on. Our car automatically kind of pulled off the road to the back gate of one of our state parks. It was off a dirt road. We ended up at a blind gate. No one would have seen us off the road. My mom pulled in behind us, not knowing what we were doing. She thought there was something wrong. And then both my husband and I had that odd feeling in our heads, looked at each other and said, uh-oh, they were going to take us. My mom came to the window and said, is somebody sick? What's going on? And then the feeling went away.
We lost Blake Cousins, but he just Skyped me a message to ask. He wants to know if you have any camera equipment that you can have by the ready in case you're taken next time, and maybe would these beings allow you to photograph them or their ships?
Boy, we're working on something right now, because there's a certain area that they could possibly be photographed. I don't know that they would allow it. It's going to have to be a catch me if you can type thing. And we're trying to figure out if we should use infrared. I don't have an infrared camera, but I'm going to try and figure out something. Maybe I can borrow one from one of our ghost hunting groups or something. They use them all the time, where I can set something up and run it. And if I get that funny feeling or think maybe something might occur, see if we can't capture something.
That would be amazing. There are lots of sightings going on, and thank God for these people having cameras in their pockets all the time, because they're actually able to capture these craft. The other downside about it is because of technology, we can't discern what's real, what's not, because of Photoshop. But nonetheless, if you captured something, that would be amazing, and we truly hope that will happen one day. Now, I got to ask you something in regards to the drawing you had from Jenny, which shows the family being pulled out of the house, out of the window. There was an interesting case I read where this family, it was actually a mother and a son that were being abducted. The son was fairly young, about 7 years old, and he claims that when the aliens took him, his exact words were, when the aliens took me, they pulled him through a solid wall, a solid door on different occasions, and he would like to stop between getting in and out because he would see colored balls, presumably atoms, or I don't know exactly what maybe the fabric of what mass is really made of. But nonetheless, they seem to be able to float through walls, take people through walls. What do you think is causing this, and have you experienced anything like this yourself?
Well, I'd like to answer that first, please.
Yes,
because
do.
It was Jenny Henderson who spoke about this in the book, and I wrote that section of the book and did the investigation on her case. And the ETs had given her a little bit of information, and she passed that information on to me. And so I spoke to some theoretical physicists about this. And what I was told is that everything has a frequency, that nothing is solid, everything vibrates at a certain frequency. So a solid surface, for example, would be vibrate at a lower frequency than the human body would. But 99% of the atom is empty space between the protons and the electrons. And if you can match up the frequency and the phase of the human and the solid object, then you can pass matter through matter. And one of these physicists told me that they have already done it on a very small scale in a laboratory, so they know that it is possible.
Preston has written this, now we're going to change gears, about UFO healings. Many people have been cured of different things. Stan Romanek didn't need surgery on his knee. People have been cured from cancer, and everything as small as a cold. Preston Dennett here wrote an entire book on UFO healings, and I wanted to ask you both if you know of any of your cases, and then maybe Preston can talk about some.
Yes, in the case of Jenny Henderson in my book, she had been ill with chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome since her abduction in 1988. And in 2012, she was healed, and she remembered that. She asked the ETs to heal her, and they did. And I talked about the entire process that she went through in this book. Very interesting.
That's fast. Denise, have you experienced that?
I have not experienced it, but I am exploring that avenue right now because I'm doing an exercise, a continuous exercise, asking for healing for a specific thing from the ETs. So we're going to see what happens.
Yeah, my book covered 100 cases. That was years ago. I think there's probably well over 200 or 300 cases in the literature right now. So I wonder what you guys think of how that speaks towards alien benevolence versus, hostility.
Oh boy, I don't believe that they're hostile, not the ones that I have dealt with or they've dealt with me, whichever way you want to look at it. I think that they have an agenda. They are trying to help us save what we have, but our Earth is also an oasis for many people that are out there. How many planets are like this? Not many. I think they need us. We need them. Just because their emotional makeup is so different from ours doesn't mean that we don't need to pay attention. And they're trying to figure out how to do that and perhaps how to blend back into their systems what they lost over a period of time. I feel nothing malevolent about them.
Well, has there been benefits then for you for having all these experiences?
I think it's a part of what I'm supposed to be doing, and if I'm a part of this program, I don't feel badly about it at all. And if you ask me would I want it to stop, no.
Wow. That's the answer I get from, most of the people I've interviewed. What about you, Kathleen? Is that pretty consistent, would you say?
Absolutely. It is consistent. People will complain to me about how frightened they are. And I have suggested to people to ask not to be taken, to say, this is really frightening me. Do you think that you could give me a break or stop taking me? And 100% of the time, they say to me, I really don't want it to stop.
Yeah. This is also brought up in your book. Some of the people who have experiences find that they've become, profoundly psychic, probably as a result of these experiences. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yes, absolutely. That was on our questionnaire, actually. And a majority of the respondents stated that they became more psychic after they had these experiences.
Isn't that amazing? Why do you suppose that is? Is it a gift from the ETs, or?
I don't know, really. Denise, do you have any thoughts on that? That's something that I'm exploring right now. I'm really fascinated by it.
There's definitely a connection there.
There is, and particularly since near-death experiencers become psychic, and abduction experiencers become psychic. Is there some process that ever takes place where the human soul partially leaves the body? Maybe, I don't know, but I just have a hunger to acquire that knowledge somehow. So that's what I'm working on right now.
I have to agree. Kathleen and I had lunch together the other day, and our lunch time was taken up with this exact discussion. Both of us have an extreme hunger to find these answers, partly because one or both of us have had some experience with illness. We've had some experience with people that we know that have had near-death experiences and have come back with some psychic ability. And this all appears to tie in, but how does it tie in and why? If they've been abducted and they've had a near-death experience and they've had possibly some recall of a past life, and since they've had that recall, they have become more psychic. Does it all line up? Does it not line up? How much of it is nonsense? We're exploring this, and we keep coming up with more and more things to add to our questionnaire study, and we're going to get there.
One lady I interviewed, she actually asked, she was being abducted by these gray-type ETs, and it was very horrifying in the beginning, but then they started talking to her, and she had a lot of spiritual experiences. And she asked, why are you doing this to me? What do I get out of it? And they told her directly, we've given you a huge boost in your spiritual growth. So I thought that was interesting.
Oh,
that
that's
is
very, yes.
Yeah.
I got something great to add real quick, but I just got to say, we got some breaking news right here from Blake Cousins. During this broadcast, just literally 4 minutes ago, we just received an amazing photo, what looks like to be two either discs or either they're part of one giant ship, really low. Just, it looks like maybe 5-10 feet above a house. Everybody will be seeing it on Third Phase of the Moon. Just, if anyone's captured anything amazing, by the way, make sure you send it via Skype or Facebook. Now, back to what we were just talking about. It's ironic you were mentioning this because Jim Sparks actually says the same thing. That everything starts out terrifying, but then these people flower, he calls them, or blossom into having these experiences be profound. Even Whitley Strieber, who was a horror science fiction writer, wrote a very terrifying book, and in the end, the book was titled Communion for the fact that he turned it to be a very positive experience. And I thought that was great. Now, also, Jim Sparks talks about that when he's on board these ships, that him and other abductees are being prepared for some sort of task, like to lead other people in a direction, to calm people down when something happens, some catastrophe, or I know we talked about this a little while ago, but something is supposed to happen on Earth, and all these abductees are supposed to be helping. Do you know anything about that? I'm going to pose this to both of you. Let's start with you, Kathleen, and then we'll go to Denise.
I have heard that story over and over again from various experiencers. They believe that at some point that there will be perhaps a natural disaster and that they will be called upon by the ETs. I really don't know if this is just another emotional experiment or if this is something that's going to take place. Everybody is curious about it because so many people have received a similar message.
Kathleen, have you had any UFO experiences getting involved in this? I mean, have you, as a result of it? I've noticed that a lot of investigators have ended up having experiences themselves, and I'm wondering about you.
I believe that I did in February.
Hello.
Hello, this is Kathy.
Hi, this is Denise. Are we back on?
Oh, we've lost John.
Uh-oh.
Funny that happened just as I was talking about.
I thought so, too. It was really odd. I'm watching the screen here, and it looks like they're all trying to get back.
Yes, we completely lost it.
Yep. I hear something off in the background. And they've only got a couple of minutes before we go off the air. Do you hear that?
What? I'm typing.
No.
I don't hear anything else.
Oh boy, I hear very like a sound like we're in a metallic room.
Huh.
And a kind of a hissing sound. It's not static. And it's coming and going. And I hear voices in the background.
I don't.
Wow. Oh, now water. You don't hear the water?
No.
Oh my goodness, that's weird. Like someone's in a swimming pool or a bathtub. You can't hear that either, huh?
No. Gee.
And it's kind of creepy.
Let me see. Oh. I'm wondering if I can call him.
I don't know. Let me see. I'm going to move my thing over here and see video call. Do you think if I just clicked on it, would I lose you?
Yes, I think so, but go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, don't do video call, though.
Oh, whoops. A call. Okay, here goes just call.
I can't even do call.
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, nothing's happening.
Oh, boy, somebody didn't want me to say that.
Nope. And I still hear it's definite splashing in the background. It's almost like the sound you would hear if somebody was doing the breaststroke and swimming towards you in a tank.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Let me hang up completely and try to reach him.
Okay.
Okay. We'll see if we can get a connection back.